Well, the federal government, and with the help of the coalition, I might add, yesterday rushed through the amendments to the hate crime bill, and it was rushed. There was less than an hour's debate on what is a significant and controversial bill which does attack the fundamentals of free speech. Less than an hour of debate is not near enough, if you ask me. Under the guise of a crackdown on anti-Semitic speech, which is greatly needed, the amendments now make it an offence to say anything which someone, not even the person referred to, feels is a threat of violence. Now, if you've watched in disbelief at what's happened in the UK with arrests for Facebook posts, get ready to be outraged and get ready to be chased. George Christensen is the National Director of Citizen Go, an organisation dedicated to defending and promoting life, family and freedom. George, good to have you on the program.
Well, thanks very much, Chris. And it's interesting you were just talking about Donald Trump, because the Senate spent more time debating Donald Trump this week than they did these most sweeping restrictions on free speech in our nation's history. It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable that you would spend that amount of time. It is not so we can get better milk into Parliament House. This is significant and a change to the way we speak and write.
Well, you're dead right on that. I mean, this is dangerous, this law, because it removes intent from hate speech offences and replaces it with recklessness. And that means, Chris, you don't have to mean to incite violence. You just have to say something that someone else might claim could lead to violence. You'll get arrested. The process is often the punishment, and then it'll be up to a judge to decide whether it was reckless or not and whether it did incite violence or not. And if you think that, well, you know, an incitement to violence, that's a pretty bad thing, consider this. Senator Matt Canavan, one of the brightest sparks there in the Senate, actually put up an amendment yesterday to say that he wanted the force to actually be defined as physical force and violence to be defined as physical violence in the bill. The Senate rejected that, and that speaks volumes. We're not talking about physical violence. This is something else altogether, and it will be misused just as these sort of laws have been misused in the UK to arrest little old ladies, teenage kids with autism, veterans, just for posting memes and, you know, pithy statements on social media.
You see, I worry about this, and I think Matt Canavan was the only politician in the entire House to understand how crucial that change was, because my actual venom in what I say about condemning an individual could be construed as violence in itself, could it not?
Well, I think it could. And look, there's debate around this, but this is the problem, that the definitions are so ill-defined that it's so broad that it's up to interpretation. And when something's up to interpretation, that's a lawyer's picnic, that's an activist's picnic.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Liberal Party and Labor Party have just basically handed it to the activists, and they're not going to go after, I mean, bizarrely, Chris, the thoughts here are the radical Islamic extremists that have been, you know, saying stuff against the Jews. I completely understand that. I completely understand wanting to nip that in the bud.
Yeah.
But, you know, actually the changes that have been made here, the radical Islamic extremists might actually take offence to such a conversation as you and I are having and call us out in the law saying that this was an incitement for, you know, violence to happen against them. It is bizarre, it is dangerous, and this is an affront to free speech in this country.
Yeah, you've nailed a very good example there in reference to using the hate speech amendments as a weapon to protect what you want heard and what you want established in your new country. You made some great social posts overnight running through examples of what can no longer be said. Explain some of them to us.
Well, for instance, if I was out there talking against this gender fluidity nonsense that gets taught in schools and drag queen story time and that sort of stuff, and I said, look, the LGBTIQ lobby keeps pushing radical gender policies on our kids, and I think it's time we showed them we won't stand for it anymore and we should take action. Well, could that be interpreted, and I think it could be interpreted by some lefty activists as an incitement to violence, that someone could act on that saying, let's take action. What action? and the action could be directly against, I don't know, a drag queen reading a story to kids at a public library. And particularly if that did happen, which would not be my fault, by the way. I mean, there was no intent to inspire anyone to do anything there. But I could be arrested, Chris. I believe that to be the case. And a lot of other people now believe it to be the case, including Christian Schools Australia and other Christian school associations that are in the Australian newspaper today, actually saying that this law puts them at risk for religious teachings that may say something about another religion or indeed a minority group such as the LGBTIQ community.
Yeah. So, just on that, transgender activism, they are extremely activist. They put pressure on their various lobby groups who put pressure on politicians and agency heads and you name it within the system. So if I were to turn around and say repeatedly a fact, that is, why are we listening to that transgender woman? That woman is a biological man. He should be ignored, and we should stand up to what he says. If down the track someone's decided to go nose to nose with this fellow in a public sphere and someone sees this and thinks that that is a form of assault, I could be history.
Well, even worse than that, I mean, the fact you've said to stand up to him, no one actually has to actually stand up to him. That person or another activist, as you rightly said earlier, could say, well, him saying to stand up to that person could potentially mean someone commits violence against that person, and therefore it was reckless, it was against this law, he should be arrested, he should be taken to court. And guess what, Chris? It's mandatory sentencing. If they found you guilty of saying that, you are going to jail. You don't get any get out of jail card.
So what will happen, and I know a lot of commentators in this media industry that I work who will simply take the pedal off, take the pressure off things that they pursue as wrong, as corrupt, as unfair. They will go light on issues. They will back off completely because they'll be too scared of their own backside.
Well, that's what we call the chilling effect, and that's what these laws are partly designed for, I believe, to ensure that people self-censor so that they may not actually be breaking the law in what they're about to say or what they're thinking. But if they think that there is a risk, they stop saying it. And that is very dangerous to democracy. When we've stopped the free flow and exchange of ideas and opinions, then we basically we've passed the realm of what it means to actually be a democracy. That's the danger for the Australian nation right now with these sort of laws.
So if there's a protest over the weekend in Sydney or Melbourne and these protesters who are supporting Palestinian people in Gaza say, we want to ensure that the Jewish people are eradicated and they, river to the sea kind of slogans on the streets of Sydney, does that mean the laws come into being and we can stop that from being said?
Well, I don't know whether the law actually, it's passed the Parliament, it's going to be signed into law by the Governor-General yet. I'm not sure that that's happened. I'm not sure how long that process takes. But, yeah, sure. That statement, which, I wouldn't go chanting that river to the sea statement, but nonetheless, it doesn't directly incite violence, but that could be used as something to pull those people up. Even more bizarrely, Chris, they talk about symbols. Like, I can understand the Nazi flag being banned. That's nearly banned in Australia already. But this law extends symbols of offence to other different victim classes, such as LGBTIQ, gender, race, sexual orientation, all the rest of it. And I struggle to think, what would be another symbol that we'd want to ban and that you would get arrested for displaying that would be against one of these groups? I can't fathom it, but that's now in the legislation. That's now going to be the law of the land.
It's a real worry, and there should have been far more time to debate this properly, and Matt Canavan should have been heard. George Christensen, thank you very much for raising this, and we'll no doubt revisit it down the track.
Thanks very much, Chris.
All right, fantastic. George Christensen, the former federal MP, National Director of Citizen Go, an organisation dedicated to defending and promoting life, family and freedom. You've heard what he said. The problem with not allowing scoundrels to wave offensive flags is that you don't know what the scoundrels are really thinking. See, I love the idea that white supremacists are caught flying Nazi flags because you can name them and shame them. You know who you're talking about. But sometimes hate laws, in trying to stamp out things that are conceivably unacceptable, you take away our free speech, and that has to be protected at all costs. I'd love to know your views. Give us a call on 13 12 69.